On December 11, 2019, the state of Texas carried out the execution of Travis Trevino Runnels. His death by lethal injection marked the culmination of a legal process that began 16 years prior. Runnels was executed for a murder committed in 2003 while he was incarcerated. His case raises significant questions about the application of the death penalty. It highlights the complexities of the justice system. The execution drew attention to issues surrounding testimony presented at trial. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Travis Runnels had a history within the Texas criminal justice system. Before the capital offense, he had accumulated prior convictions. One such conviction was for burglary of a building. This offense occurred in Dallas County. It resulted in a 5-year prison sentence. He later faced a more severe charge. Runnels was convicted of aggravated robbery. This crime also took place in Dallas County. The sentence for this offense was significantly longer. He received a 70-year prison sentence for the aggravated robbery. This lengthy term placed him within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice system. He was serving this sentence when the capital crime occurred. At the time of the murder, Runnels was housed at the TDCJ Clements Unit. This facility is located in Potter County, Texas. It was within the confines of this prison that the events leading to his execution unfolded. The murder for which Travis Runnels was executed took place on January 29, 2003. The victim was a man named Stanley Wiley. Mr. Wiley was 40 years old at the time of his death. Stanley Wiley was not an inmate. He was employed by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Wiley worked as an industrial supervisor. His workplace was the boot factory located within the Clements Unit. This factory utilized inmate labor. Travis Runnels was assigned to work there. Runnels' specific role at the boot factory was that of a janitor. He was responsible for cleaning duties within the facility. However, Runnels was reportedly dissatisfied with this assignment. He expressed unhappiness with his janitorial position. Runnels had sought a different work assignment within the prison. He had requested a transfer to the prison barbershop. This request for a transfer was denied. This denial reportedly fueled Runnels' frustration. His anger over the situation became apparent to others. On the morning of the murder, Runnels spoke to another inmate. He indicated his intent to commit violence. He told the inmate he was going to harm someone. Specifically, he stated his intention to kill someone. This statement foreshadowed the events that were about to occur. Upon arriving at the boot factory that morning, Runnels approached Stanley Wiley. He confronted his supervisor. Runnels was armed with a knife. He used the weapon to attack Mr. Wiley. Runnels fatally stabbed and cut the victim's throat. Stanley Wiley died as a result of the attack. Following the crime, Runnels was charged with capital murder. At his subsequent trial, Runnels entered a plea. He pleaded guilty to the charge of capital murder. This plea acknowledged his responsibility for Mr. Wiley's death under the specific circumstances defined by Texas law. The capital murder trial for Travis Runnels took place in 2005. The proceedings were held in Amarillo, Texas. Given the nature of the charge and the guilty plea, the trial proceeded to the punishment phase. In Texas capital cases, the punishment phase requires the jury to answer specific questions. One critical question is whether the defendant poses a future danger to society. The state sought the death penalty for Runnels. To secure a death sentence, the prosecution had to convince the jury of Runnels' future dangerousness. This factor became a key element for the jury's deliberation during the punishment hearing. The state presented evidence and testimony to support their argument. Among the witnesses called by the state was A.P. Marilat. Marilat was identified as a criminal investigator. His testimony was intended to inform the jury about the realities of the prison system. Marilat's testimony focused on several aspects of incarceration. He discussed the Texas prison system's security levels. He also addressed the restrictions placed upon inmates based on their classification. His testimony aimed to explain how an inmate sentenced to life for capital murder would be managed within the system. This information was presented to help the jury assess the potential future danger Runnels might pose if not sentenced to death. The accuracy of this testimony later became a central point of contention. A significant issue arose concerning A.P. Marilet's testimony during the punishment phase. His statements regarding inmate classification were later challenged. The defense argued that this testimony was inaccurate or even false. Marilet testified that capital murder convicts sentenced to life imprisonment were automatically assigned to G3 housing. He described G3 housing as relatively unrestricted compared to higher security levels. This suggested a life-sentenced capital murderer would have significant freedom within the prison. He also testified that previous convictions would not be considered when determining an inmate's classification level after a capital murder conviction. This implied that Runnels' extensive prior record would not impact his housing level if he received a life sentence. Furthermore, Marilet testified that inmates could potentially achieve less restrictive custody levels after serving 10 years. This testimony painted a picture of a life-sentence capital murderer potentially moving into less secure, more integrated prison environments over time. However, this depiction was later found to be inaccurate. The policies governing inmate classification had changed prior to Runnels' 2005 trial. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice classification plan had been updated. This updated plan contained provisions that contradicted Marilet's testimony. The revised plan stated that capital murder convicts sentenced to life would never be classified below G3. This contradicted the idea they could move to less restrictive levels over time. More critically, the plan stated that inmates who assaulted staff must be classified at least at a G4 level. G4 represents a higher, more restrictive security level than G3. Runnels had murdered a staff member. Under the actual policy, he would have been placed in G4 or higher, not G3. The plan also stipulated that custody level was not determined automatically. Instead, it was set by a committee. This committee based its decision on judgment and the inmate's record. Marilet's testimony that classification was automatic and ignored prior convictions was incorrect according to the standing policy. The discrepancy in Marilet's testimony formed a major basis for Travis Runnels' subsequent appeals. His legal team argued that the false testimony had a direct impact on the jury's decision. They contended that the jury's finding of future dangerousness was improperly influenced. The defense argued that the jury believed Runnels would be in less restrictive housing if given life. This belief, based on Marilet's testimony, would make him appear more dangerous within the prison system. Had the jury known he would be in more restrictive G4 housing, their assessment of future danger might have differed. Texas officials acknowledged that Marilet's testimony contained inaccuracies. However, they argued that these inaccuracies did not invalidate the death sentence. They contended that Runnels' crime and his overall violent behavior justified the death sentence, regardless of the classification testimony. Officials pointed to Runnels' history of violent conduct. This included actions taken even after the murder of Stanley Wiley. Runnels had assaulted guards while incarcerated. He had also engaged in disruptive and aggressive behavior. This included throwing waste and other objects at correctional officers. Texas officials argued that this history alone provided sufficient grounds for the jury to find him a future danger. They maintained that the jury would have reached the same conclusion even without the flawed classification testimony. The issue of Marilet's testimony had surfaced in other cases. His similar testimony had led to the overturning of 2 other death sentences in Texas. Despite this precedent, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Runnels' appeal. The court cited timing issues in the presentation of the claim. This procedural ruling prevented a full review of the false testimony's impact. Runnels' lawyers continued to press the issue. They maintained that a death sentence based even partially on false testimony is unconstitutional. They argued that the state's presentation of inaccurate information violated Runnels' due process rights. The case eventually reached the highest court. The U.S. Supreme Court was asked to consider the appeal. However, the Supreme Court ultimately denied Runnels' final appeal, allowing the execution to proceed. With all appeals exhausted, the execution of Travis Runnels was scheduled. The execution was carried out at the state's death chamber. This facility is located in Huntsville, Texas. The method of execution used was lethal injection. Runnels was administered a lethal dose of the drug pentobarbital. This is the standard drug used for executions in Texas. The process began once the drug was administered. Runnels was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. The official time of death was 7:26 p.m. The time elapsed from the injection to the pronouncement of death was 22 minutes. As is customary, witnesses were present to observe the execution. Travis Runnels had 3 friends attend as witnesses on his behalf. The victim's family also had the right to witness the execution. Stanley Wiley's sister and brother-in-law were present. They witnessed the state carrying out the sentence for his murder. Before the execution proceeds, condemned inmates are typically offered the opportunity to make a final statement. This is a chance to offer last words or express thoughts. Travis Runnels chose not to make a final statement. In the aftermath of the execution, A.P. Marilat commented on his trial testimony. He later acknowledged the possibility that his testimony might have been incorrect. Marilat stated that he testified based on his understanding at the time of the trial. He maintained that he had no intention to mislead the court or the jury. Marilat asserted that he had no agenda in providing the information he did. He expressed a sentiment regarding the potential consequences of his testimony. Marilat stated that he would not want someone to suffer if his information was indeed wrong. His acknowledgement, however, came years after Runnels' trial and after his execution. The case of Travis Runnels highlighted several complex issues inherent in capital punishment. It brought into sharp focus the potential impact of flawed evidence presented during trial. Specifically, it raised questions about expert or quasi-expert testimony regarding prison classification and its influence on jury findings of future dangerousness. The case contributed to the ongoing national debate surrounding the death penalty. It fueled discussions about the fairness and accuracy of the legal processes involved in capital cases. The reliability of testimony and the appeals process designed to correct errors were central themes. Travis Runnels was the 9th person executed by the state of Texas in the year 2019. His execution was also the final one carried out in Texas that year. The case serves as a somber reminder of the irreversible nature of the death penalty and the critical importance of accuracy in every stage of the legal process.